Dracula begins with Jonathan Harker's journal. 3rd of May, Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on the 1st of May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. It's a very peculiar opening to what we now consider to be a classic novel, complaining about the trains being late. And that's because this is, in a sense, is a travel narrative. There's a great deal of movement around Europe and around Great Britain. Obviously, Dracula himself migrates and arrives at Whitby on the Demeter. But that fact of the trains being late is a sort of mundane detail that Stoker peppers the novel with. And here, at the beginning, right at the beginning, it's an indication that we're moving away from the centre of civilization. We're moving to the edge, we're moving to the periphery, where the trains are late, where the populations have strange beliefs and customs and superstitions. And so Harker finds himself very much in a world of belief in magic and legends. And these, in a sense, are confirmed when he encounters Dracula. But Dracula does it through emphasising his racial ancestry, from talking about the long history and his own pedigree, lineage, or of course what you might call his bloodline. And this was something that was very significant, not only in terms of European history, what you might call antiquarian history, but it actually had a significant bearing on international politics of the time. Essentially, Dracula emerges from what's known as the Eastern Question, and this is a tangle of political allegiances and political heritages that really dominated international politics and was focused very much in Eastern Europe, trying to work out the relationship and the rights and responsibilities between a whole range of different nationalities. And so this is described in the novel. Transylvania is described as a whirlpool of these different ethnicities, and Dracula himself traces his own heritage in the same way that Van Helsing describes that mix, that blend, and also that conflict between the Magyars and the Saxons, for example. So there is a political anxiety in terms of what's happening when Dracula arrives in Britain. He's bringing with him those fears of political instability and turbulence in mainland Europe. Now, some commentators call this reverse colonialism. They suggest that Dracula, the figure of Dracula, embodies fears of British imperialism, that it's going to somehow bite back, it's going to infiltrate the mother country. Personally, I'm rather sceptical of that because, of course, Eastern Europe isn't part of the British Empire. I think there's a wider issue here about trying to maintain European political integrity and in terms of trade and maintaining peace. And really the Eastern Question was a continued threat to that, and of course eventually broke out after the novel was published with the First World War. So it's important to see Bram Stoker's work in the context of the politics of the time. There are also other issues when one thinks about politics, insofar as vampires had already been used as figures, as metaphors, satirizing politicians, because of course politicians suck the blood out of the people. So in fact some of the first writing about vampires in England was suggesting that they were allegorical, that this was a way in which border states of the Austro-Hungarian Empire could criticise and satirize those who were in government. And very quickly the word gets taken up in English and British politics as a way of critiquing those in power, speculators and investors, those who are in control of the economy. This continues throughout the 19th century, and in fact the political theorist Karl Marx uses images of vampirism to describe capitalism. And this becomes, I think, a way of thinking around some of the questions of the vampire and the significance of the figure in Bram Stoker's novel. High Victorian culture was obsessed with consumerism. It was commodity culture. It was about buying stuff, having things. It was about the acquisition of wealth. And of course that's what Dracula is doing. He's buying the biggest things he can. He's speculating in property. He's got masses of gold, and he's also very aware of the intricacies of the formal arrangements that need to be made if one is migrating and taking scores of boxes of earth across the sea. So he uses, for example, different solicitors in order to disguise his trail. In fact, at one point, Jonathan Harker says he has such an eye for detail that he would make a good solicitor himself. So in other words, he's manipulating the law and the legal framework of the country to which he's moving, in order to make it work for him. And then, where does he buy property? Where does he want to be? He wants to be right at the centre of power. He wants to be in Piccadilly, essentially in sight of Buckingham Palace and Whitehall. So he's very much moving. He wants to move within those sorts of areas. He sees his wealth, his money, as a form of investment, if you like, that is going to have political ramifications and consequences.